Hello and welcome to Global Research Unlocked, where we discuss what's rising from growth industries to rising risks and opportunities in global markets. I'm TJ Thornton, Head of Product Marketing at BofA Global Research, and we're recording this episode on Thursday, July 16, 2026.
There's space tourism. Kind of sounds, a little science fiction-y, but if you can build a big structure in space, imagine taking a weekend and going and looking at the Earth, among other things. And then that opens the door on the whole lunar economy. The lunar economy, there could be mining in the moon and that sort of thing. So the ability to start building infrastructure in space opens a lot of opportunities. And that crux of that is the ability to put mass in orbit inexpensively.
The SpaceX IPO has increased the market's focus on the opportunities that exist in space and the industries that could be disrupted. But before declaring yet another technology a complete game changer, it's important to understand what's possible and the risks to getting there. Also, practicalities like cost and other limitations. We're joined today by Ron Epstein, who covers the aerospace, defense, and multi-industry sectors for BofA Global Research. Thanks for joining us, Ron.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. Thanks, TJ.
So, Ron, first question, what's enabled satellite services to evolve from offerings like TV and radio, and I'm ashamed to say I still have satellite radio in my car, to much more bandwidth-intensive broadband?
Yeah, I have satellite radio too.
It's
It's good stuff, right? So I can't put that down. Largely the development of LEO orbit satellites. So when you think about satellites, there's discrete orbits that they can be in. LEO stands for low Earth orbit. There's also GEO and MEO. There's modified orbits too. They tend to be farther out. Satellites that are farther out have more latency in terms of how you interact with them. Low Earth orbit satellites, LEO satellites, have low latencies, and the proliferation of low Earth orbit satellites have enabled other ways to interact with them, as you mentioned. So, broadband is one of them, but all kinds of things.
So, Ron, what's been the decline in launch costs over the last, say, 10 years, and where do you think costs can go over the next 10?
Yeah, so launch costs has been a big driver in what we just talked about. What drove this proliferation of LEO orbit satellites was the decline in launch costs, and one of the drivers there is something called reusability. Before there was any reusability on a rocket or a launch vehicle, every time you used it, you threw it away. So the cost per kilogram was very expensive. So to put some numbers around that, a non-reusable rocket per kilogram could be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a kilogram. Then reusability, a good metric to use is SpaceX's Falcon 9. It's widely reusable, partially reusable spacecraft, where the first stage is reusable. That lowered that to about $2,000. So order of magnitude lower to about $2,000. Then there's another rocket called Falcon Heavy, which is basically a couple Falcon 9 strapped to each other. That lowered it yet again by volume to about $1,000 a kilogram. By lowering the launch cost that much, it enabled entrepreneurs to do all kinds of interesting things. So the reduction of launch costs is a huge thing. Now, when you start talking about fully reusable spacecraft, where every stage of the spacecraft can be reused. So when you think about a rocket, you see it launch, and then the first stage drops away, and then there's a second stage, maybe even a third stage that pushes things out into orbit. If the entire thing is reusable, there's discussion around getting the cost per kilogram into orbit down to maybe $100. And yet again, that's an order of magnitude drop. So you're talking an order of magnitude from 20,000 to say 2,000 to 100, and then another order of magnitude. And that opens all kinds of doors for entrepreneurs and creative people to start doing things in orbit, because it just becomes so much more affordable.
Okay, and Ron, what are those things? So clearly, launch costs have already come down a bunch, maybe coming down significantly more. What sort of things could we expect to hear about over the next several years?
Yeah, so there's the immediately obvious stuff, right? So it's got implications for communications. So we already mentioned satellite radio, but there's satellite broadband. There can be satellite direct to mobile phone, mobile services, satellite texting, if you will, all kinds of communication services that enables, because the fixed cost to put the assets in place, the infrastructure, if you will, comes down a lot because the launch cost comes down. But then that also opens the door for other things. One area where people have talked about is orbital compute. SpaceX has talked about potentially doing orbital data centers, as well as distributed orbital compute with GPUs. But you can do other forms of orbital compute. You can also do forms of Earth intel, optical signals intelligence, that's radio frequency stuff, other things as well. That has implications for national security. Then just imagine if the launch costs come down enough, then you can put large volumes of things in space. Then you can start actually building big structures in space. That allows you to do things like in orbit manufacturing. And why would you want to do that? Zero G. So there's cases in the pharmaceutical world where if you can do pharmaceuticals in zero gravity, you can develop structures, crystals is one example, that you can't possibly grow where there's gravity. So you can do all kinds of interesting manufacturing in a zero orbit environment. There's space tourism. Kind of sounds a little science fiction-y, but if you can build a big structure in space, imagine taking a weekend and going and looking at the Earth, among other things. And then that opens the door on the whole lunar economy. And the lunar economy, there could be mining in the moon and that sort of thing. So the ability to start building infrastructure in space opens a lot of opportunities. And that the crux of that is the ability to put mass in orbit inexpensively.
Okay. Interesting discussion about who owns the moon, and thus the materials that are in it. But that's for
that impact is a very, very interesting discussion.
Yeah. That's for another discussion. So right, you've emphasized sort of the criticality of getting these costs lower. I know that SpaceX's Starship, the hope is that is what it will enable, much lower launch costs. So what really differentiates the Starship?
Yeah, it's interesting. So what Starship is doing, and they're working towards, is having a fully reusable spacecraft. And I think the best way to think about this, I think this really kind of nails home, what reusability means and why it's so impactful. I like to use the analogy of an airplane. So imagine, TJ, if you went over to Kennedy Airport, or my home airport, Newark Airport. We all love Newark Airport. You're over there, DWR, jump on an airplane, and you're going to fly to the West Coast. So you jump on an airplane that's a brand new airplane. You fly to the West Coast. You get off it, and guess what? They have to destroy it. They throw it out, and then when you fly back, they have to use a whole new brand new airplane, and they fly you back. And if it was a 737, that's a $50 million airplane. So the airline cost $100 million to do the round trip just in the asset cost. Now, what first stage reusability has done, and SpaceX has successfully done it, as have others. You take the engines off. So the airplane flies to LA, you get off, they remove the engines, and then they destroy the airframe. But then they can put the engines back on another airplane, and those engines are maybe a quarter of the value of the plane. Full reusability is what we have today. The airplane lands, you get off, other people get on, it takes off again. So when you think about what SpaceX is trying to do with Starship, it's fully reusable. So second stage goes to orbit, first stage comes back, lands itself, second stage comes back, lands itself, they clean it up, they put it on a new first stage, and then they just shoot it off again. And that's how you can think about the impact of reusability. And then I would imagine once they get it, others will get it too. And it's, when you think about it with the analogy of the airplanes, this kind of makes sense, right? Every time we shot off a rocket, we destroyed it. And if you think about all the engineering and CapEx and everything that goes into a rocket, why would you want to do that? Well, that's all we knew how to do. And now we do have the capability and the engineering prowess to not do that anymore. And that's where it's going.
Okay. Newark's a nice airport. I was just there for the first time in a long time.
Newark's great.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the New York area has got some good airports. Finally, it took about 3 decades, but we got there.
We did.
Miami, on the other hand, that's not the case. But I'm sure they'll be there soon. So just in terms of the transition to reusable rockets, right? It seems simple, but why is it so challenging to get there?
Yeah, it's you just think about the physics involved. Putting something just on the first stage, having it return and catching it or having it land itself, as Falcon 9 does. That's a very difficult engineering problem in and of itself. Now, the first stage gets even more difficult because as it goes into orbit, it has to re-enter. And when it re-enters the atmosphere, it deals with all kinds of super challenging thermodynamic problems and heating, and you have to be able to withstand all that, return, and then and this is the key, rapidly reusable. So reusable spacecraft exist. The space shuttle is an example of a reusable spacecraft. However, it wasn't rapidly reusable. It would return, and then it would have to go through maintenance, repair, and overhaul services. It would have to replace tiles. That could take more than a year. And the real, if you will, holy grail here is just imagine if the space shuttle returned and you just strapped it on another rocket and shot it off again. And that's what Starship is trending towards. That's their ultimate goal, that it returns, you put it on another first stage, away you go.
Okay. And, one of the applications you talked about, particularly if we get to reusability, is, data centers in space. The benefits are fairly obvious. Solar power is plentiful. There are fewer NIMBY issues that some data centers are already running into in space. But aside from launch costs and sort of getting to reusability, or at least getting to the point where a cost decline that much more, what are some of the other challenges of space-based or orbital data centers?
Yeah, let's hope NIMBY is not an issue, right? Or maybe it would be if you're on the moon or you live on an asteroid. But so, NIMBY is not an issue. So where are the challenges? The first challenge we already talked about. Can you build this infrastructure affordably? And the real driver for that is launch. So let's assume you check that box. Boom, you launch process done. All right, you have a satellite in space. As you mentioned, you have the sun. It's always sunny in space, right? Sun never goes away. So you can use solar panels to collect energy. Well, they have to be pretty big, particularly depending on the application. So if you're going to do a data center in space, you should, I don't know, if you think about a space-based compute, it's kind of like one rack of GPUs. So it could be, 100 kilowatts of power on this one thing, right? So you need some big solar panels that generates heat. So challenge one, big solar panels, you have to get them there. That kind of goes back to the launch thing. But then B, you generate heat, you have to dissipate that heat. Now, dissipating heat in space is challenging because there's no air. So all the heat that you dissipate has to be dissipated through what's called radiation. So you need big panels to radiate that heat. And there's some interesting engineering tricks you can do with pumping some fluid around, moving things around. But so getting rid of heat and collecting energy are the two big challenges. Now, my understanding is from the due diligence I've done, the challenges are difficult, but not insurmountable. And they've been chalked up as engineering challenges as opposed to inventing new science challenges. So my expectation is that on your orbital compute and other applications in space, that it's all doable. It's just a question over what time frame and exactly how. So when you put mass in space, and if you can do it affordably, what we've seen happen across space markets is that tends to open doors on new opportunities that people haven't articulated yet. So the ability to build infrastructure in affordable ways in orbit begets more opportunities, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of this just that kind of ties together and goes back to this capability to put mass in orbit inexpensively.
Okay, I did want to talk about sort of broadband and mobile service, because it's already started to have an impact on some of the incumbents out there. How do satellite options, the cost of satellite broadband, currently compare to more conventional offerings? both in terms of the price paid, but also the effectiveness or the speed. And where do you think we could be in a few years, 10 years?
Yeah. So if you look at satellite-based broadband, interestingly enough, I installed myself at home. It works pretty well. So I'm not going to pitch it, but I think it works great. I'm not selling broadband to anybody, but I did satellite broadband at home, and it works very, very well. It's nowadays about comparable with terrestrial. When you look at the cost of the two, for fiber-based broadband or space-based broadband, the pricing is about comparable. I think it can vary regionally depending on where you are, like anything. What's interesting about it from a consumer point of view, the space-based broadband is everywhere. It's not limited to where there's fiber, literally anywhere. And what's also interesting about space-based broadband, when you put another satellite in orbit, it helps the entire network. So if you put fiber in New Jersey, you're helping people in New Jersey. If I put another satellite up, it's helping the entire network. So and anybody who can access that network. So it's effectively global, right, by definition. In terms of speeds, the fiber speed tends to be quicker, depending again on where you are. Different services, I think have been quoted at on the order for space-based stuff anywhere from 100 to 250, maybe 300 megabits, where terrestrial services, fiber, if you will, could be 1 gigabit. So you get more speed out of the terrestrial service. So it's right now, and because of that, because of the hard line, there can be a little bit of latency with the satellite broadband, but it's better at an acceptable level. And as they build out more and more satellite broadband capability, you'll see speeds increase, and the whole system will just kind of fill out. I think today, if you look at the number of satellite broadband on satellites that are up there, our broadband satellites that are in orbit, you're talking about 11,000. And that's something that could move towards the order of maybe 5-fold, 6-fold, that number, about 50, 60,000 over, the next 5 to 10 years. And as that fills out, you'll just have a broader service offering globally like broadband.
Okay. Interesting. Quick follow-up there. Back to the sort of satellite radio example, you sort of need line of sight. People who had satellite TV, you got used to losing your TV when there was a heavy rainstorm. Are those sorts of things issues? And I've also heard that it could be more problematic to get the broadband service in a denser urban area.
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges, like any service offering. However, my own personal experience, from a broadband perspective, it's been less sensitive to weather than other things that you get. That being said, in an urban environment, you need an antenna. That's you're accessing the sky. So in an urban environment, it can be trickier. That opens up a whole discussion on, so how do you service an urban environment? And that would be through probably an existing servicer in an urban environment, a teaming arrangement or something like that between those that have the satellite infrastructure and those that don't, or those that have the satellite infrastructure could potentially build out their own an urban infrastructure. We'll see how that goes down the road, but that is an open question on how that will be addressed.
Got it. All right. Last question for you. And this is one where your defense background is particularly helpful. Any considerations when it comes to satellite service, space service, and national security?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about space-based intelligence, before the proliferation of LEOsats, low Earth orbit satellites, space-based intel was largely limited to bespoke, expensive, very technical, marvels of satellites that had specific locations, and they would be over a target at a specific time. What the availability to space has done for national security markets has proliferated constellations of satellites that have optical sensors. So they look back at Earth through cameras, radio frequency sensors, and they do it in a way that it's almost real time. So you can collect real time intelligence across a broad spectrum of areas in ways that you couldn't before. And what that allows one to do is you just imagine you can look at everything all at once and then find specific areas where you have to really do the more bespoke intel with the bigger, more bespoke satellites. So it's had profound implications on those markets. And then also when you think about just communication markets and what happened in the Ukraine, having the availability of communication satellites. Like I said, these networks are global. It allowed the Ukrainians to have communications on the battlefield that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have had through a satellite network. So there are meaningful national security implications, both from an intel and communications perspective. So it's very important though. I don't think it's talked about enough, to be honest with you, but having a robust constellation of low Earth orbit, Earth observation, and communication satellites does give you an intel leg up.
Okay. Very interesting. And I suppose that goes for residential security, commercial security, all these applications too.
One day over here. Yeah, they doesn't exist yet, but they could definitely one day. And so back to the question, what are other markets? Well, others that could easily happen.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. Okay. All right, Ron. Thanks very much. I know you said you're not selling the broadband service, but I'm going to have to look into it. It was a good pitch. But I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.
We've already made great strides in taking the cost per kilogram of launch down. It's gone from about 20,000 per kilo to 1 to 2,000, and there's the prospect of launch going closer to $100 per kilogram if we can get to full reusability. That could open up many applications, from even better and cheaper broadband to orbital data centers to various security applications to mining the moon. There are challenges to all of this, of course, including on the launch side, but looking at orbital data centers, for example, hurdles like heat dissipation are likely surmountable. Thanks for joining.
Bank of America and B of A Securities are the marketing names for the global banking businesses and global markets businesses, which includes B of A Global Research of Bank of America Corporation. Lending, derivatives, and other commercial banking activities are performed globally by banking affiliates of Bank of America Corporation, including Bank of America N.A., member FDIC. Securities, trading, research, strategic advisory, and other investment banking and markets activities are performed globally by affiliates of Bank of America Corporation, including in the United States B of A Securities, Inc., a registered broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC, and in other jurisdictions by locally registered entities. Copyright 2026 Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.